Welcome to the Fungineering podcast. This is an impromptu intro buffer because we still haven't recorded any.
One day.
One day we'll get around to it. Actually, I realized this evening that we've been doing this for a year now.
That's a long time.
Yeah, I guess. I feel like we really haven't put much effort into it. I know I sure
That's a
haven't.
short time. That's true. You haven't edited the episodes or published the episodes or done anything except
No.
send me the audio files after we're done. Sometimes weeks later.
Yeah, yeah, I was going to add that. Yeah. I can't really think of what I contribute except for expert research about Tesla motors.
hmm
And even that's of marginal value.
Sarcastic comments.
Ah, yes. So I have a job interview in the morning.
Good luck.
Yeah, so it's with a company that I interviewed with last fall. And I know we've been wanting to talk for a long time about job interviews, about how to make more money as an engineer, maybe about how to be a better engineer. That could possibly be its own episode. But even at this point in my career, I always feel a lot of anxiety about job interviews, even though I've had, I don't know, 20 or something. I couldn't even begin to count how many interviews I've had. And almost all of them have gone fine. I mean, I've gotten offers from job interviews probably over 75% of the time. And it still seems to create all this anxiety. And I kind of had a theory about that. I've never had the opportunity to be on the other side of the interview. And I know that's something you've talked about before. You've participated in a lot of interviews of candidates where you work.
hmm
And
Per-
I've never
participated.
been on that other, yes, been forced to participate, been dragged kicking and screaming into the room.
On both sides.
Yes. So I don't know. I feel like if I had that opportunity more in my career, maybe I would sit there and I'd be like, yeah, these people that come in, you ask them usually really stupid questions that have very little value in a process that is notoriously bad at actually indicating whether or not you're going to be a good employee. And maybe it would calm me down when I'm going into an interview. So, do you feel that way? I mean, you've talked about interviews and stuff, in the recent past. So, do you have any anxiety about that at this point in your career?
Not really. I feel like the thing that really changed for me though was, I guess the way of thinking of it is there are those that set of companies. It's like Apple, Google, Facebook, Amazon, Microsoft that are like kind of the big tech companies. And so I interviewed at Amazon and Google. And what I was really hoping for was to get a job at Google, but Google rejected me and Amazon said yes. And so at that point,
That sucks. I'm sorry.
it was okay. And so at that point, I read, in this case, there's a bunch of seminal like blog posts like Steve Yegg's Get That Job at Google blog post. And there's a bunch of people who talk about how to deal with technical interviews, technical meaning software engineering, which is very different from the type of interviews that you get, I think. So I read these things and I sort of studied up for the interviews like it was a test or something. And I went and did them. I did Google first, I think. And so I was most nervous and least prepared. And then I did Amazon and I did pretty well in that one. And so then the whole year I was at Amazon, I would talk to my coworkers about interview questions. And then eventually I was interviewing other engineers myself. And I really thought about, what are we doing here? Like, what's going on with this stupid interview process? Because everyone in tech agrees that it's stupid, but also people sort of in general agree that we don't really have anything better. And I just thought about it a lot. And the thing that really helped was when I started thinking, what are the interviewer's incentives? Like if I'm an interviewer, what are my incentives? And when I talk to other people, where do they differ from me? How can I figure out what everyone's incentives are? And then as an interviewee, best, I would say, exploit that knowledge in order to get them to give me a pass or whatever. So they'll be like, he's a pass.
Yeah.
And I think that a lot of the incentives are really pretty perverse because an interviewer is not going to pay you A lot of times they're not going to work with you directly. They're not really going to be judged all that harshly on whether they did a good job interviewing you, whatever that means, or whether their choice is right or wrong. And if all of that sounds ridiculous, it's because it is. But really, what an interviewer wants is to go to the interview and have a relatively relaxing experience and feel smart about themselves. They want to feel like they're a smart person who knows stuff and is good at solving problems. And so an interviewer in a technical interview will ask you a question like, I'm going to give you an array of ones and zeros, and the zeros represent empty spaces and the ones represent walls. And then I'm going to give you an XY coordinate in that array, and I want you to write an algorithm to flood fill that array for me, or something like that. And it's like, oh, okay, I can see how you would probably do that, but it's not exactly something I did in a class assignment in school, or something like that. And so there's sort of the level 1 approach to that, which is like, I realized I'm actually going on a tangent because you were asking about feeling comfortable in interviews. But anyway, I'm using...
No, you're doing great. Just keep going.
I'm using this as an extended example.
It feels wonderful.
Okay, great. So you'll look at this problem and, like, assuming you know how to program at all, you probably could figure out some kind of way to solve it. And the level 1 approach is you just start writing stuff. You're like, all right, let's write a for loop. Let's write another for loop, because it's going to take 2 for loops to solve this at least. Whatever. You start writing your stuff. But if you start thinking on a meta level about this and all the questions interviewers ask you, why did the interviewer ask you this question? Because you're going to work at like Amazon. You're going to be writing a CRUD app that like reads records out of a database and it like throws them up on the web page. And then the user's going to click like add to cart, proceed to checkout, place order, and then it's going to write some more records to the database and like fire off an email. You're not going to write a flood fill. That's completely ridiculous. Like, no one's ever going to ask you to flood fill anything. You're going to be like, hey, why don't I go into MS Paint and I just click on the thing and then it flood fills it. And it's like, what if by some stretch of the imagination, people want to actually flood fill an image? We're writing an image cataloger thing. People are going to upload product images and we want to flood fill the background with white. And it's like, I'm just going to go get like Image Magic or whatever. I'm going to go to Stack Overflow and be like, how to flood fill. And then I'm going to copy paste the first code I find that's in the language that I'm using. Like, who cares? So the reason the interviewer is asking you this question is because they think it's like the right amount of clever. And they're like, yeah, this problem, it takes 2 for loops, not just 1. So there's like a little bit of action going on there. And you got to think carefully, because what if there's a loop? What if you start filling in pixels and then you get back around to the start and then you like infinite loop? Oh my gosh, that's the twist. And so if you start answering this question and then you bump into something like, oh yeah, an infinite loop there, that's where you tell the interviewer like, oh yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, I see there's a little bit of complexity there. And the interviewer is going to lean back in their chair and fold their arms and smugly think to themselves, yeah, there is a bit of complexity in there. Yeah, this is a finely crafted interview question that I thought about for minutes before I gave it to you. And it's really important that you sort of flatter your interviewer. You make them think, all those questions that you thought about for a couple of minutes, like that's a really well put together interview. You're a really smart guy for coming up with these questions. And so I'm going to solve them, but not so great that it makes you feel bad about yourself, because that would be terrible.
Yeah, not better than you're imagining yourself solving these.
Mm-hmm. And so if you've really studied for your programming interviews a lot, you should be able to come in and just smash these out of the park. But that's not exactly what you want to do. You want to stumble a little bit. So you should be like, oh yeah, I see where the twist is. And most of these questions, they simply can't be that hard, because the interview only lasts like 45 minutes. And some of the candidates who come through, you're like, are you sure that you know what programming is? Like, did you lie to the recruiter? Like, what's the recruiter believe here? Because they just they write like 4X on the whiteboard, and then they just kind of stop there. And then you have 45 minutes of terrible awkwardness with the interview candidate, where you're like, what are we doing here? What's going on? But if you know how to...
Can we just pull the ejection handle and everybody save the rest of their afternoon?
We all wish we could. But for the most part, like people will know how to program, and so they'll get through it. And so then we have this joke that's like, for many of these questions, because the question has to be at this level of simplicity where you can do it in 45 minutes, but this level of complexity where it weeds out candidates who are awful. A lot of them are, you can write 1 or 2 loops to do it, or 3, and the runtime performance will be abysmal with the naive approach. But then the interview candidate or interviewer inevitably says, well, could you speed it up a bit? And the answer is always use a hash table. And so we have this joke like, oh, we should make like a t-shirt that's like the interview shirt that's like, hey, can I just use a hash table or something like that? But a hash table will always speed it up. So if you learn about hash tables and how they're going to speed something up, then you never whip out the hash table as your first answer. Answer number 1 is always, I use these loops. And they're like, could you speed it up? And you're like, yes, I can. I'm going to use a hash table. And like, to further reinforce the joke that this is, if you're writing a flood fill algorithm on a whiteboard at an interview, you could use a hash table to speed it up. You like map all of your pixels that have been filled to a hash table, and then that way you can look them up again to see if they've been filled. That will in fact speed up your algorithm. It's kind of silly. Nobody would write it like that, but it'll help. So if you get into the mind of your interviewer, like the generic interviewer and also the one that's sitting in front of you at the time, and you think, what are his incentives? What does he want out of this? And if you really think about that, and then you really start trying to interview to those, instead of just answering the questions that are placed in front of you, I feel like it both makes your interview like more likely to land you an offer, but it also makes it a lot more pleasant because you can be judging yourself and thinking, am I playing to his incentives? And you'll know if you are. You know if you're making the interviewer feel good about the interview. And it makes the whole thing a lot less stressful. It's stressful for like the first couple minutes while you're trying to work out like what kind of guy this is exactly. But once you've done that, then I feel like that really takes the edge off a lot for me.
I like your solution that you pretend that the problem is clever, and you pretend really that you appreciate the cleverness of the problem and that you're seeing these pitfalls and you're enjoying that. But the whole time you're just thinking, this is a stupid question, and I know you only spent minutes on it.
Hey, we both got to do this charade, right?
Yeah, you you pretend to interview and I'll pretend to be interviewed.
That's about right.
Yeah, I also really liked what you said about all the specific incentives. If we imagine the case where you just have the direct hiring manager, the guy you're going to work directly for, interviewing you. And something you said was, he does not pay you. And that's a really good point. And a lot of times, now this is different between the kind of work you do and the kind of work I do, but in my case, the companies I work for don't even pay me. It's contracts with customers. And, some of them are private, some of them are government. And so oftentimes my hours are being billed straight through to a customer. And in that case, you have an extra perverse incentive that not even the company is worried about how much they need to pay me to get me in there, if they're interested in me. And so I've had situations where I've been negotiating with a company and they make me an offer that is kind of poor and it's for a particular job title. And I've rejected that offer and suggested my own price. And when they come back with that, something closer to that higher price, they've changed the job title to, 1 or 2 steps higher. And really all that means is that they're under some kind of contract where they're billing a customer a certain number of dollars per hour for each person of a particular title. And so when I asked for more money, all they did was say, well, okay, when we hire you, we're just going to say that you're a senior specialist engineer instead of just a senior engineer. And so that just means that their customer is going to pay an extra, $20 or $30 an hour for every hour you bill to them.
Mm-hmm.
So on that note, you should always just ask for ridiculous amounts of money if you're dealing with a company that's doing that, because they really don't care.
Yeah, you want to ask for the upper end of what you think won't cause them to run away.
Right. I guess the problem is, how do you identify that? I mean, I've gone and looked on places like Glassdoor and sites like that. And, as one data point, if you're very familiar with what other people around you are making where you work, and you understand the different job classifications, and you've been at the company you're currently at for quite a while, say, I don't know, 4 years or more, you can go to a site like Glassdoor and you can look at the pay levels for different job descriptions. And one thing that I've noticed doing that where I currently work is that it's very, very time sensitive data. And the data that Glassdoor has is always aging and it's always getting worse. And so when you go and you look at that, it appears that you may be paid way, way, way high when in actuality your manager is telling you, well, you're near the bottom of the range for your job description. And that's why you got this extra big raise this year. And so those kind of sites are difficult to decipher.
Yeah. I I mean it's in the company's best interest to have you have the least information possible about salaries.
Yeah. One thing we always know, though, is our company's salaries are very competitive. They insist on it a couple times a year.
We know they're competitive because they told us.
I've never had a company I've worked for be like, we asked around with the HR people at, other similar companies in the region and found that our salaries suck. We're gonna do something about it.
Our salaries are a little bit too high and we're kind of struggling under the weight of them. They're always just competitive. They're kind of in the middle.
Yeah.
Also, isn't that always implicitly true because people work at that company? If the salaries were completely not competitive, they'd have zero employees.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of inertia too. I mean, I have coworkers who I think are probably way underpaid, but they've been at the company for 30 years.
Yeah, okay. I was gonna say, do you think you could pay someone half of what they could be getting in the market? But I guess you could, yeah.
Yeah,
Probably a lot of people are out there making half.
I think there are.
Yeah.
My pay has gone up a lot in just the last about year and a half. And it's really made me realize how much money is on the table that people aren't taking. If you're in the kind of industry where you're billing to a customer, eventually you'll probably find out what the company is billing your time for. And when you find that out, you'll realize that it's somewhere on the order of 2 to 4, maybe even 5 times what your total hourly cost of employment is. And so when you start understanding those kinds of numbers, you'll really see how much money you're leaving on the table.
But then similarly, your labor is also competitive. And if you can get up there and ask for like 95% of what you're bringing for the company, they might just be like, I'm going to go with other guy who doesn't ask for as much. He might do a mediocre job, but whatever.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I don't think you could ever capture 95%. I think realistically you could capture half.
Yeah.
Because, every company, even well-run companies, they have tons of people in HR and finance and all these things that they can't bill directly to customers. You end up wasting hundreds of hours bidding contracts that you don't win. You know, sometimes you just bid a contract badly and you run over on the time. So you have to have a lot of money coming in for extra things. And then you have everybody from about the director level up just bills overhead. They're not billing projects or a specific customer.
Yeah, that's true too. Yeah, there's a lot of overhead.
So you really can't expect to capture the majority of that money that you bring in from a customer every hour.
So you feel less nervous about interviewing now? Have I completely solved your problem? 100%.
Yeah, see, the technical questions that I get in the kind of interviews I go to, they'll be like, have you ever encountered a problem where this kind of thing is happening? And you sit there and you think for a few moments, and then it dawns on you that the longer you think, the dumber you look. And so you try to like start coming up with an answer really quick, and then you get more nervous. And then you think of an example that's pretty weak, and you try to stutter it out and explain it, and you realize that even though you're talking to other engineers, it can sometimes be really hard to explain this stuff, especially if you're essentially switching industries like I am. And so, like, how much of the current type of work I do would I have to explain to these guys to make them understand how clever I was in solving this problem?
So at Google, when you interview, the recruiter will give you this advice that's like, as soon as someone asks you a question, you should start talking, basically. Like you should start explaining what your thought process is. And it serves like the dual purpose of it makes you sound not as dumb because you're not just sitting there in silence. And also it helps the interviewer like ascertain whether your thought process is reasonable. Like if you start saying, oh, okay, I think I would try to approach it like this or whatever, the interviewer can guide the candidate away from something they know won't work or towards something that they know will, or they can give advice like, just go ahead and implement it the bad way. And that'll be an illustrative example for me.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be able to understand something about how you think just from seeing that. And it just generally makes the interviewer a lot less awkward. And so it sounds like in the example that you're giving, just starting to talk would also help a lot.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's good advice. I'm hoping that when I go in tomorrow for this interview, it won't really be that technical. It's with the same hiring manager who offered me a job last year. And then they've recently contacted me again, asking if I'll come interview with them again. So they reinitiated contact, and there's a better chance that we will not end up having the big roundtable interview like last time with several of their engineers.
Wait, how's the interview work?
Well,
What's this roundtable?
the last time I was in there interviewing, I interviewed with the hiring manager, who would be my direct manager, a project manager, and one of their lead engineers.
This sounds like a colossal waste of time for these people.
Yeah, I would bet. Yeah. If you imagine what the total cost of employment of those guys is. Yeah. And all three of them, I asked them at one point, I was like, how long have you guys been with this company? And all three of them had been there 20 plus years. So they were pretty senior guys. I can imagine they're making very good salaries. So it was probably a colossal waste of money. And ultimately, I think they could have just looked at my resume and been like, it's probably better to hire this guy than not hire him. I mean, my experiences align directly with the job. Like, it's an exact fit.
Mm. The typical Google interview is 4 one-on-one interviews with another person doing the same role, and usually around the same level. And then there will be a lunch interview also, but it doesn't like matter. It's just for the candidates to eat lunch and have someone to hang out with. But it seems really silly to have 3 or more people in the same room because, well, whenever one of the people who already works there is speaking, they're wasting all the other people's time. And then whenever the candidate is speaking, probably everyone can't be evaluating their answer and be extracting information from it. It's probably targeted at one of the roles that's represented there, but not all of them. Unless they're saying something really bad. But that seems very wasteful.
Yeah.
So what else makes you nervous about interviewing?
Last time I interviewed with this company, the reason I ultimately didn't take their offer was we couldn't agree on time off. And a lot of companies these days in my industry have these kind of ridiculous policies where they say, well, here's the maximum amount of time off that anybody can get, and nobody gets more. Well, really, people do get more. I mean, if you're at the executive level, you get more. They just pretend to have this set in stone policy, and then they will refuse to negotiate it for most people. And so I worry that we may be just wasting our time having me come back in and interview again, because they basically have to budge on the policy. It may be so simple for them as just raising my job rank another grade, and hopefully that would open up them giving me more time off. But if they won't do that or they can't do that, or maybe I'm at the highest amount of time off that I can get for all their job grades, then it just wouldn't work out and we would be wasting our time. So I'm a little worried about that. But that's not really a general interview thing that's specific to this situation. But I get irritated when these companies pretend like we have these rules and, they're not fundamental laws of the galaxy. They're not laws of man. They're not like political laws like the state of Texas says nobody gets more than X days of vacation. Nobody. It's just a company policy and it's like, well, that can be your policy. It seems like a bad idea when candidates you were otherwise excited to hire turn you down because of it. But I don't understand really why companies do that. I guess they're trying to keep everybody from negotiating every little detail and wasting so much time doing it. They act like the money is the only thing we can negotiate. Everything else is set in stone.
I guess I can think of a reason. If you imagine everybody has their current salary number written on their employee ID badge, then everyone can see everyone else's salary. And I feel like there's really only two outcomes you can learn from that. One is you see that someone's salary is lower than yours, and you're like, yeah, okay, that's fine. Or you see that their salary is higher, and you're like, I don't know if that guy really does enough extra work, or if his work's really that much better, and it justifies his higher salary. And I feel like the inequality is much more irritating when you're on the low end. And so everyone's salaries are kind of concealed from each other, unless you explicitly talk about it. But vacation's not. You can definitely tell when people are gone, unless you have some kind of crazy remote work thing going on. But that might be it. Like, I could imagine them offering you 2 more weeks of vacation, and then it really makes everyone else you work with irritated for some reason, partly because they act like they can't budge on it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they've gotten themselves into a trap here, where if everyone knew that they were more flexible about it, it'd be like, oh, okay, some employees have 2 weeks and some have 5 for whatever reason. And they'd be like, yeah, it's just the way the universe works, I guess. But instead they think they're in a universe where it's, 2 or 4 weeks or something per year, or I don't know. And everyone should be the same. That's the only reason I can think of. They could just be stupid. That's a realistic reason, too.
Yeah, I think in some cases there are really stupid reasons behind it. I'm trying to think if I can really elaborate on one of those without giving too much away. But I would really like for it to work out. I mean, I'd like to go to work there. I think it'd be a nice change of industry, and go to work at a new place. I feel like I've been at my current employer a long time.
Yeah.
So I hope it works out, and I hope that they can actually budge on the time off. But I'm going to talk specifically to the hiring manager about that. And I wish he would have followed up with me when I rejected their final offer last year, because I emailed him too and told him why I rejected it, but he never followed up. Hopefully he kept those emails, or he's, remembered the situation. So he's coming into this with knowledge of what needs to be fixed.
Yeah, hopefully.
Something I found, though, the first time I negotiated with this company was you can just ask for ridiculous amounts of money and they'll probably give it to you. It was really unbelievable. They made me an offer initially that was low and I rejected that. And then they said, well, how much do you want? You name a number. So I just named a number that I thought was crazy. And they came back with a counter offer of exactly 95% of that number. So you could tell they probably just have like this stupid HR process, like a form with a checklist on it for every candidate. And it's like, if candidate suggests number, skip to box 16, write number here, multiply number by 0.95 and write product on line below. I can just imagine it being that dumb.
Except it's an Excel spreadsheet.
Maybe so. I wouldn't be surprised if it was printed pieces of paper. But
maybe so.
But it really made me realize, back to what I said earlier about how much money you leave on the table if you're billing a customer directly, or even in a situation like you're in, where you sell a product And so the company sells a service or a product or whatever, and then your pay has to come out of the revenues. It made me realize the huge disparity between like what I was making, which I was absolutely happy with at the time. I mean, for years, I felt like I have gotten the better end of the economic bargain with my employer and that I've made really good money. And then in the last year and a half, I've gotten a substantial amount of raises. And so nobody bats an eye at it. And I had another recruiter I talked to a few months ago, and he asked me about how much money, I was kind of thinking about, because they play real coy, like, we don't just want to ask you, we want to kind of dance around it for some reason. And so I threw out a number that was like another $20,000 higher than I had told this employer that I wanted when I made my counter offer. And like he was just like, okay. And then he just went on and talked to me several more times before I realized I didn't want to go to work for that company. But there's a lot more money out there on the table for you as an engineer than you probably realize, especially if you're kind of in that career period of more than 5 years, but less than a really senior guy, however long it would take you to become that. I feel like in that area, there are probably a ton of underpaid engineers. And if you'll go out, interview somewhere that maybe you'd like to work at, maybe not, go out there and interview and get an offer and bring it back to your employer and say, hey, what can you do to match this offer? Assuming you want to stay with your current employer. But it's a really easy way for you to get a pretty substantial bump in pay. And you'll also get an indication of how interested your employer is in you and how interested these other employers are in you. So it's a very cheap way to get a raise. I would definitely tell anyone, if you're thinking of going out to one of these silly programs that companies give where they're like, get an MBA in 2 years or get a systems engineering degree in 2 years, all you have to do is give up every other weekend of your life and then, do an online class for 4 hours a week and then do homework assignments. And at the end of it, they're going to offer you a 6% raise. What they're probably going to tell you is we'll give you credit for a master's degree, which is typically the equivalent of 2 years of experience, which, what does that even mean? What is 2 years of experience worth? But they'll tell you it's worth 6%. So if you go and you give up all this time for 2 years, you give up every other weekend, all these hours you waste for a systems engineering degree or an MBA or something ridiculous like that you're just going to forget anyway. You give up all of that, you get 6%. Just go interview at a competitor and get an offer and bring it back to your employer. I promise you will get more than 6% and your total investment will be about 4 hours.
Yeah. That comes with the caveat, though. You have to go interview at other companies. I know a lot of people who are just very uncomfortable with that, and they want to believe that their employer is offering them competitive raises and that their salary is going up and it's keeping pace with the industry, and they just want to believe and they don't want to go interview and ask for more money.
When I went from NASA to my current employer, I got a 45% raise.
Did you have to get a systems engineering degree or an MBA to do it?
No, I didn't.
Nice.
So in effect, I still know just as much about systems engineering and business administration as people who did.
But you don't get the piece of paper.
I could print one out.
Hang it next to your laser safety officer certificate.
Yes. So that would be an additional piece of advice from the Fungineering podcast, free of charge, is if you're ever thinking in your engineering career of going out and getting one of these extra degrees, man, it's probably just not worth it. I mean, unless you're looking to eventually become an executive and you pretty much have to have an MBA to break into that. Unless it's that kind of deal, or you want to get a law degree to go with your engineering degree so you can do patent law for your company or something like that, where there's a real explicit gate that you have to open with this degree. But if they're just out there shotgunning this degree offer to everybody in your engineering organization, and there's no explicit opportunity this is going to immediately open, guaranteed, you're probably wasting your time. And you'll probably be much better off just going and getting a job offer from a competitor, bringing it back and seeing what they can match. And I know people have a lot of anxiety thinking, oh, if I go and, walk into my boss's office and say, here's my offer letter from our competitor, he's just going to get pissed and fire me. Or I'll be top on the list for layoffs next time around. Or I'll get bad raises afterwards. Like, none of those three things happen to me. So anecdotally, I can say it doesn't happen 100% of the time. And I highly doubt that you'll be targeted for layoffs. If you're a good engineer and you do good work, and your company will come back and give you a reasonably competitive counteroffer, then they're probably not going to turn around and lay you off. They're going to lay off the slag.
Well, again, to address that, I would say just think about what the incentives are for everyone involved. So if you go to another company and come back with an offer in hand that's like, I'm worth 20% more than what I'm being paid here, is your manager going to be like, I want my team to be less effective? Like, I want to fire this guy and I want to get less work done with my team? Like, why would they ever in their right mind say that? Or I want to fire this guy, then have a hole in my team, and then have to do all the work to hire another guy to fill the hole, and that guy will be of an unknown quantity.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully I can keep that guy at the same 20% lower salary. Like, does that sound like a fun path for the manager to take? Or would it be easier for the manager to ask for 20% more salary that comes out of someone else's pocket that's not his, in order to keep everything flowing smoothly?
Yeah.
Like, where are his incentives here?
Yeah.
Really, you and the manager are a team working together to get you more salary so that everything can just stay status quo.
Yeah. And imagine how much more forceful those decisions on your manager's part are when he's just a couple years from retirement, and he wants nothing more than for this ship to keep sailing smoothly for 3 or 4 more years until he can just retire and say, fuck all of this. Then his incentives are very perverse. Because at that point, does he even care about the company? Only if it's not going to affect only if it's going to affect the next 3 or 4 years. He's looking to get out.
Yeah, most companies don't have a way to get you to care about them 5 years after you stopped working there.
Yeah. If you're on a pension, then as long as it's fully funded, you don't care.
Yeah. Yeah, so think about the incentives of everybody, and then feel less nervous about the whole endeavor.
Yeah, and I would really like to see a lot of engineers making a lot more money, because I know I have friends who have hinted at their salaries. A couple of them have explicitly told me their salaries, and they're always much lower than mine. And for their levels of experience, I feel like they're low. And so I feel like once you get past 4 or 5 years of experience, you can really start commanding a lot more money. And even that's just psychological. I think a lot of younger engineers, even from like the 0 to 4 year range, are probably worth more than they're getting paid, but it's hard for them to prove that. And it's hard for them to make a compelling case based on experiences that they can verbalize to someone.
Yeah.
So I want to see all of our listeners go out to a competitor and interview, get an offer, come back and get a counter offer from their current company, and then come on to Reddit and tell us how well it went.
That would be really amazing.
Yeah. I'd like to see a lot of people make a lot more money, because I got really nice raise and out of doing it myself. And, it's the raise was nothing to scoff at, and it was several years worth of just regular raises, and it cost me about 4 hours. The other nice thing is, let's say you're at a company and you're just sick of being there and you're ready to move on. Okay. So why don't you go somewhere, get an offer, a place you may not really want to work the rest of your life, but use it as an experience with an interview, get an offer, come back to your current employer, get them to match it in part, and then go on about your job search from that higher level of income that you're now making.
Yeah. Even that would be better.
Yeah. Because, if you can get your employer to match 20% or so, then maybe the next person that you are really interested in going to work for will say, man, you make 120%. Now I'm going to offer you 20% higher than that. Now you're at 144%. So you can very quickly boost up your salary a lot, especially when you're in that experience period over about 5 years. And you can really point to things you've done, experiences you've had. And I've seen in a lot of engineers, and I saw it in myself when I was back at about 5 years. It was this great point in my career where I had done enough stuff that I was confident in my ability as an engineer. I knew that I could be stupid and there were pitfalls to be had. And I also knew that I could go off and learn anything I needed to learn to accomplish any engineering task. And I was still eager, and my soul had not been crushed by corporate engineering bureaucracy. And so it was this beautiful time in my career. And I was lucky that I was presented with this really great project to work on for a year with a very small team, a decent budget. It was high visibility to the executive leadership team. And it was the most fun I've had in my entire career. And so when you're still in that part of your career and you can articulate those things to a potential employer, you can really start commanding bigger offers. And like we said earlier, think about how much you make now, how much you want to make, what you could maybe research online that would be possible, but that's always hard to know. And just ask for a ridiculous number. Ask for something pretty high. Think of what you think you'd like to make and ask for $20,000 more than that. And just go in there like that. And when they ask for a number, just look them square in the eye and say the number and don't blink. And if they're one of these companies with a giant HR bureaucracy, they're just going down a checklist anyway. Like I said, when I made a ridiculous offer last year to a company I talked to, they came back and counter offered me exactly 95% of it. Like 95.000%. So they were just taking what I asked, chopping off 5% and offering that back to me. So
it tells you weren't asking for enough.
Yeah. I won't make that mistake again. I'm going to ask for much more this time.
$1 million.
But again, I took their offer, took it back to my current employer, got them to partially match it, stayed there for, it's been 9 more months now. And now those people are calling me back, asking me to come interview again. So yeah, I'm going to ask for a lot more than I asked for last time. You're leaving money on the table. I can almost guarantee it. To our audience, you're leaving money on the table. So That's your homework assignment. Go out, get a job offer from somebody else. Spend 4 hours. It'll take 4 fucking hours. Who cares? Get a job offer. Get your current employer to match it. Come in, tell us how well you did, and then start funding us on Patreon.
There you go.
I feel very passionate about this because I have friends who are unhappy with their jobs and very unhappy with their pay. And I think they could command a lot more if they would go out and take the initiative and do this.